The cold was a constant companion. It lived in the stone floors of the healer's den, a damp chill that seeped through the thin soles of her worn leather slippers. It clung to the rough wool of her tunic and nested deep in her bones, a permanent ache she had long since stopped noticing. Alara's world was a place of perpetual winter, both inside and out. She was an apprentice, a title that was a cruel joke. Maeve, the pack's head healer, used her for little more than scrubbing blood from the floors and grinding herbs until her fingers were stained and raw. Useless, Maeve would hiss, her words colder than the wind that tore through the pines of the Blackwood territory. Not an ounce of magic in you. Your touch is dead, girl. Remember that. Alara remembered. She felt it every time she reached for a feverish pup, a desperate hope fluttering in her chest, only to feel nothing. No spark, no flow of life. Just the simple contact of skin on fur, offering no comfort but the meager warmth of her own body. So she focused on what she could do. She learned which roots eased pain and which leaves staunched bleeding. She could set a bone with a steady hand and stitch a wound with neat, precise lines. It was practical. It was real. It was work that did not require a magic she did not possess. But it never earned her a kind word. It never earned her anything but another task, another sneer, another reminder of her profound and inescapable worthlessness. She was an orphan, a stray taken in by the pack's previous alpha out of some forgotten sense of pity. She had no name, no lineage, no power. She was a ghost haunting the edges of a world she didn't belong to. The day the Alpha King returned, the very air seemed to hold its breath. Kalen. His name was a legend, a whisper of thunder and ice. He ruled all the northern packs, a king of wolves who had not been seen in their territory for a decade. He was a creature of myth, said to be ancient, powerful, and utterly merciless. They said he'd been fighting a war on the Shattered Peaks, holding back creatures of nightmare that sought to spill into their lands. Word came that he was victorious, but the cost had been high. The messengers who'd arrived ahead of him were grim-faced, speaking in hushed tones of the king's terrifying power, a storm of frost and fury that had frozen his enemies where they stood. Alara was outside, gathering firewood, when the horn blew to announce his arrival. The sound echoed off the mountains, a deep, resonant cry that vibrated in her chest. Pack members rushed from their homes, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They lined the path to the great hall, eager for a glimpse of their formidable ruler. Alara stayed where she was, hidden by the edge of the woods. She had no desire to be part of the crowd, to be jostled and ignored. It was better to remain invisible. From her vantage point, she saw the procession, grim warriors, their armor dented and stained, their faces etched with exhaustion. And at their center, a figure so immense he seemed to dwarf the very trees. The Alpha King. He was not riding. He was walking, his stride long and powerful. Yet there was something wrong. A stiffness in his gait, an unnatural pallor to his skin, visible even from a distance. A strange shimmer in the air around him, like heat haze on a frozen morning. She watched until the last of his guard disappeared into the fortress, then turned back to her task, the weight of the firewood cutting into her shoulder. The king's arrival meant nothing to her. He was a distant star, cold and impossibly bright. Her world was here, on the ground, in the dirt and the cold. Hours later, as dusk bled purple and gray across the snow, a frantic shout tore through the quiet of the healer's den. One of the king's personal guard burst through the door, his face ashen. "He's collapsed! The king! He fell in the courtyard!" Maeve was on her feet in an instant, her usual scorn replaced by a panicked urgency. She grabbed her satchel of remedies and rushed out, shouting orders. Alara was forgotten, left behind in the sudden chaos. Curiosity, a dangerous and unfamiliar impulse, tugged at her. She slipped out the back door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She found him near the ancient heart tree, a massive figure crumpled in the snow. His guards stood in a helpless circle around him, their fear a palpable scent in the air. No one was touching him. "Don't get near," one of them warned as Maeve approached. "The cold. It burns." Alara crept closer, using the shadows of the building for cover. She could see him clearly now. King Kalen was a landscape of a man, all broad shoulders and powerful limbs, clad in black leather and fur. His face, harsh and beautiful like a carved mountain, was contorted in pain even in unconsciousness, and he was covered in a delicate crystalline layer of frost. It clung to his dark hair, sparkled on his eyelashes, and traced the veins on the backs of his hands. A visible aura of cold radiated from him, making the air around him waver. The snow beneath him hadn't melted. It seemed to be freezing even harder. Maeve took one look, her hand hovering a foot from his skin, and recoiled as if struck. "The frost curse," she whispered, her voice trembling with dread. "The legends are true. Goddess preserve us. He's lost." She backed away, shaking her head. "There is nothing to be done. No poultice can fight this. No herb can thaw a soul that has frozen itself from the inside out. His own power has consumed him." The guards looked at each other, their faces filled with a despair that was terrifying to behold. These were the hardest warriors in the north, and they looked like lost children. A man stepped forward from the king's retinue, his robes trimmed in silver. He had a lean, sharp face and eyes that missed nothing. Alara recognized him as Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor. "Take him to the royal wing," Valerius commanded, his voice calm and steady amidst the panic. "Place him in the chamber with the great hearth. We will wait." The guards hesitated, their fear of the chilling aura warring with their loyalty. From her hiding place, Alara felt a strange pull. It wasn't pity. It was something else. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate from her core toward the fallen king. While everyone else saw a terrifying curse, a power that killed, she saw only a man in agony. As the guards struggled to lift their king, wincing as the cold bit at their hands even through thick gloves, Alara slipped away. She returned to the healer's den, her mind racing. Maeve was already there, muttering about omens and the end of days. "He's dying," Maeve said, not even looking at Alara. "The king is dying, and the long winter will fall upon us all." Alara's voice was a whisper. "But what if he can be warmed?" Maeve finally looked at her, her eyes filled with contempt. "Warmed? Do you think a few blankets can fight a curse that has raged for centuries? You are a fool, girl. Stay out of it. This is the affair of wolves, not whatever you are." The dismissal stung, as it always did. But this time, something else rose alongside the hurt. A stubborn, defiant spark. She thought of the pain on his face, the utter loneliness of his state, surrounded by people too afraid to even touch him. That night, she couldn't sleep. The hum was still there, a persistent thrumming in her blood. She slipped out of her cold little room and made her way through the silent fortress. The royal wing was heavily guarded, but she was small and knew the servants' passages. She moved like a shadow, driven by an instinct she didn't understand. She found his room. 2 guards stood outside, their faces grim. She waited until the changing of the watch, when for a few moments the hallway was empty. Her hand trembled as she pushed the heavy oak door. It swung inward with a low groan. The room was vast and cold, despite the fire roaring in the massive stone hearth. The flames seemed to shrink away from the bed, their light and heat swallowed by the oppressive chill that emanated from the man lying upon it. King Kalen was on a bed piled high with furs, but the frost was still there, a glittering shroud over his powerful form. His breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint plume of white vapor. He looked less like a king and more like a fallen god, beautiful and terrible in his frozen stillness. The pull was stronger now, a physical thing that drew her forward. She walked to the side of the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should have been terrified. This was the Alpha King. His power was radiating off him in waves of killing cold. But all she felt was a profound, aching sorrow. Hesitantly, she reached out her hand. She stopped just short of his skin, remembering Maeve's words. "Your touch is dead." But the urge was too strong. She let her fingers brush against the back of his hand. The cold was shocking. It was not the simple absence of heat, it was an active, aggressive force that bit at her skin, sharp as 1,000 needles. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. And beneath the biting frost, she felt it. A flicker. The faintest, deepest tremor of life, stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. A sound at the door made her spin around. Lord Valerius stood there, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" Ilara froze, expecting to be dragged away, to be punished or thrown in the dungeons. She bowed her head. I'm a healer's apprentice. I wanted to see if I could help." Valerius stepped into the room, his gaze flicking from her to the king. He seemed to assess the situation with a cold, detached intellect. "The healers have declared it a lost cause. His curse has finally claimed him." "He's not gone," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can feel him." A flicker of something, was it interest, crossed the advisor's face. He walked closer, his eyes fixed on her hand, which was still near the king's. "The cold does not harm you?" "It does," she admitted. Her fingers were already numb, turning a pale, waxy color. "But it's bearable." Valerius was silent for a long moment. "The guards cannot stay in the room for more than a few minutes at a time. The cold weakens them. No healer will come near him." He looked at her, a strange, calculating light in his eyes. "If you wish to stay, stay. Tend to the fire. See that he is not disturbed. It will make no difference, but it will quell the rumors that he was abandoned." It was a dismissal and a permission all in one. He thought her a fool, a sentimental girl playing at being a healer. He was using her to keep up appearances. She didn't care. When he left, she was alone with the frozen king. An arrangement born of convenience and despair. She pulled a small stool to the bedside. The vigil had begun. The first day was a lesson in cold. Ilara kept the fire blazing, but the room remained frigid. The cold from the king's body was a living entity, pushing back against the heat. She piled more furs on him, though they seemed to do little good. The frost on his skin would recede for an hour, then creep back with renewed vigor. She talked to him. She didn't know why. It felt less lonely. She told him about the herbs she used, about the way the sun looked rising over the eastern peaks, about a stray pup she'd once befriended. Her voice was a small, quiet thread in the vast, cold silence of the room. She would periodically touch his hand, his arm, his forehead. Each time the cold was a shock, a pain that made her teeth ache. But she forced herself to endure it, believing, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that the contact mattered. That her simple, non-magical warmth was a tiny anchor holding him to the world of the living. On the second day, Lord Valerius returned. He brought her a tray of food, bread, cheese, and watered wine. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. "You are still here," he stated, his eyes on the king. "Has there been any change?" "The frost receded from his face for a while this morning," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "And his breathing. I think it's a little deeper." Valerius looked, his expression skeptical. "A trick of the light, I'm sure. You should not get your hopes up, child. It is kinder to accept the inevitable." His tone was smooth, paternal, but something about it felt wrong. It was too polished, too calm. He spoke of his king's death as if it were a political inconvenience to be managed. "He's not gone," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. A thin, humorless smile touched the advisor's lips. Such loyalty. He would be touched. He left without another word. Later that day, she dared to do more. She brewed a hot tea of willow bark and feverfew, herbs for pain and endurance. She knew he couldn't drink it, but the steam was warm and fragrant. She dipped a clean cloth in the hot liquid and began to wipe the frost from his face. As she gently dabbed his brow, his eyelids fluttered. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She froze, watching him. It didn't happen again. Had she imagined it? But for a single heart-stopping moment she had felt a shift. A response. That night she was too tired to sit on the stool any longer. The cold had seeped into her so deeply that she shivered constantly. She did something desperate. She climbed onto the edge of the massive bed, pulling a single fur over herself, and lay down beside him, careful not to touch him directly. Even with a foot of space between them, the cold was intense. But she could feel that flicker of life more clearly now, a tiny ember she was determined to guard. She fell into an exhausted, dreamless sleep. She woke to a change. The cold in the room was sharper, more profound. She looked at the king, and a gasp of fear escaped her. The frost was thicker. It had crept up his neck and was beginning to trace the hard line of his jaw. The patterns were intricate, like ferns on a frozen window pane, but they were terrifying. It looked like the ice was consuming him, swallowing him whole. This was the third day. Her hope from the night before curdled into dread. He was getting worse. He was losing. She scrambled off the bed and rushed to the hearth, stoking the fire until it roared, spitting embers onto the stone. It made no difference. She ran back to his side, her mind a frantic blank. What could she do? She had no magic, no power. She was useless. The door opened, and Lord Valerius entered, followed by two of the king's guards. His face was a mask of solemn duty. "It is time," he said, his voice resonating with false gravity. "His struggle is over. We must announce his passing to the council and ensure a smooth transition of power." "No!" The word burst from Alara, sharp and raw. "He's not dead. He's still fighting." Valerius gave her a look of pity that was more insulting than any anger. "Child, you have done more than anyone could ask. But you must see what is before you. The frost curse has won. We must think of the kingdom now." He gestured to the guards. "Escort her back to the healer's den, give her food, and see that she rests." Panic seized her. A cold, absolute terror that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. They were going to take her away. They were going to leave him to die. And Valerius, he seemed pleased. The realization struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't just accepting the king's death. He wanted it. "You can't," she pleaded, backing away toward the bed. "Please, just a little more time." "There is no more time," Valerius said, his voice losing its patient edge. It was now cold and hard as steel. "The pack needs a leader. As regent, I must—" "He is the leader!" she cried, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "He is the Alpha King." The guards moved forward, their expressions apologetic but firm. Alara scrambled onto the bed, placing herself between them and the king's body, a shield of flesh and bone against armored warriors. It was a pathetic, hopeless gesture. "Get out of the way, girl," one of the guards said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "No." Valerius's patience snapped. "Remove her, now." As the first guard reached for her arm, a strange sensation flooded Alara's senses. It was a feeling she'd felt faintly for days, that low hum, but now it surged, a powerful current connecting her to the frozen man behind her. It was a bond. It was a mating bond, nascent and incomplete. but undeniably there. He was her mate. The truth of it slammed into her, breathtaking and devastating. This wasn't just a king she was trying to save, it was the other half of her soul, and she was watching him die. The guard's fingers closed around her arm. The touch was impersonal, but it was the final catalyst. All her grief, her terror, her newfound impossible love, and her rage at Valerius's betrayal coalesced into a single, defiant point of light within her. The cold from Kaelin's body was leaching into her, a killing frost that seeped through her back. It felt like dying. She felt her own life force being drawn out, and she didn't fight it. If she was going to die, she would die with him. She twisted away from the guard's grasp and threw herself fully onto the king's body, wrapping her arms around his chest. She pressed her face against the icy hardness of his tunic. "I will not let you go," she whispered, the words a prayer, a promise, a command. She closed her eyes and pushed. Not with her muscles, but with her spirit. She pushed all of her warmth, all of her life, all of her will, down the fragile thread of the bond connecting them. Something inside her shattered. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A breaking of a dam she never knew existed. A torrent of power, hot and fierce, erupted from her core. It was fire. A pure golden fire that blazed through her veins and burst from her skin. A wave of heat exploded from her body. The guards were thrown backward, crying out in shock as they hit the stone wall. The air in the room shimmered and warped. The furs on the bed smoldered. The oppressive cold that had dominated the chamber for 3 days was incinerated in a heartbeat. Lord Valerius stared, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. What is this?" Ilara didn't hear him. She was consumed by the fire. It poured from her hands, from her chest, directly into the frozen body of her mate. It was a living flame, seeking out the ancient cold, the heart of the curse, and devouring it. The frost on Kaelin's skin didn't melt. It vaporized with audible hisses, turning to steam that filled the air. She felt his body convulse beneath hers. She felt a deep, shuddering breath rack his massive frame. The first real breath he had taken in days. The ice was breaking. The curse was dying. And then, his eyes snapped open. They were not the icy blue of legend. They were molten gold, swirling with the same fire that now coursed through her. He looked past the stunned guards, past the terrified advisor. His gaze locked on hers. He saw her. In his eyes, she did not see a king looking at a servant. She saw a man looking at his salvation. She saw recognition. He knew. He had known, even in the depths of his frozen sleep. He had been waiting for her. With a strength that seemed impossible, he sat up. The last of the frost shattered from his skin like a carapace of glass, tinkling on the furs. He didn't look away from her. His hand, warm now, gloriously, impossibly warm, came up and cupped her jaw. His touch was reverent. He pulled her to him, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He lowered his head to the curve of her neck, and she felt the sharp prick of his canines against her skin. There was a brief, searing pain, and then a flood of pure bliss, of connection, of rightness. The bond, fragile and frayed before, slammed into place, a bridge of light and power between them. He lifted his head, a single drop of her blood on his lips. He looked at the chaos in the room, at the cowering guards and the aghast Lord Valerius. His voice, when he spoke, was not the whisper of a man returned from the brink of death. It was the deep, resonant thunder of a mountain awakening. "Mine," he growled. The word was a declaration, a claim, a judgment. Then, he slowly turned his fiery gaze upon his chief advisor. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a coldness that had nothing to do with his curse and everything to do with a king's wrath. "Valerius, Kalen said, his voice dangerously soft. You seem surprised to see me. The advisor had paled to the color of bone. He took a step back, his composure finally shattering. Your Majesty, it is a miracle. We thought you were lost to us. Kalen's smile was a terrifying thing, a predator's snarl. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rising to his full, intimidating height. He kept one arm possessively around Alara's waist, holding her against his side as if she were the most precious treasure in his kingdom. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, a stark contrast to the deathly cold of before. You thought, Kalen repeated, taking a slow step forward. Yes, I imagine you did a great deal of thinking and planning. He stopped in front of Valerius. The advisor, a tall man in his own right, seemed to shrink before the sheer presence of his king. The frost curse, Kalen continued, his voice a low murmur that filled the room. An ancient affliction of my bloodline. It rises when I expend too much power. It freezes me from the inside out. And only one thing can counter it. Not herbs, not prayers. A fire to match my ice, a soul flame, my destined mate. He looked down at Alara, his golden eyes softening for a fraction of a second. You knew this, didn't you, Valerius? You have read the old texts. You knew I was incomplete, vulnerable. Valerius began to tremble. Majesty, I don't know what you mean. I have only ever served you. Liar, Kalen snarled. The temperature in the room plummeted, but this time it was not an uncontrolled curse. It was a deliberate, focused wave of power that emanated from the king, frosting the floor around Valerius's feet. You thought I would finally succumb on the battlefield. You hoped the creatures of the peaks would finish me, and when they failed, you saw your chance. You were ready to declare me dead, to step in as regent. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Tell me, how long until your regency became a permanent reign? Valerius broke. He fell to his knees, his face a mess of terror. Forgive me, my king. I was weak. The kingdom needed stability. I feared chaos. You feared I would find her, Kalen corrected, his gaze flicking back to Alara. You feared I would be made whole. A king with no weakness. A king you could no longer manipulate. He looked at his guards, who were now on their feet, staring in horrified awe. Seize him. Take him to the deepest cell in the dungeons. He will await my judgment. The guards, galvanized into action, grabbed the sputtering advisor and dragged him from the room. His protests and pleas echoed down the stone hallway before being cut off by the slam of a distant door. Silence descended. It was just the two of them now. Kalen turned his full attention back to Alara. He gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. She was still trembling, overwhelmed by the eruption of her own power, by the violence of the claiming, by the entire world shifting on its axis. Does it hurt? He asked, his thumb brushing over the fresh mark on her neck. His voice, which had been thunder and ice, was now soft as snowfall. She shook her head, unable to speak. The mark didn't hurt. It tingled. It felt like coming home. What is your name? He asked. Alara. It was a whisper. Ilara, he repeated, tasting the word. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a sight so rare and beautiful, it was like seeing the sun rise after a lifetime of winter. It transformed his harsh features into something breathtaking. You have fire in you, little healer, a fire bright enough to save a king. She finally found her voice. I don't understand. I've never had any magic. It was dormant, he explained, his hands moving to her waist, holding her securely. Sealed away. It would only awaken for one reason, to protect your mate. He looked into her eyes and she saw centuries of loneliness, of pain, of waiting, all washed away in this single moment. I have been cold for a very long time, Ilara, so very cold. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. She felt the connection between them, the bond, now a vibrant living thing. It was a conduit of emotion, of thought. She could feel his profound relief, his overwhelming gratitude, and a depth of love that was so vast it terrified and thrilled her all at once. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, "for not leaving me." In that moment, she was no longer the worthless orphan, the useless apprentice. She was a woman of fire and power. She was his. And he, the mighty Alpha King, was hers. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The story of what happened in the royal chamber spread through the pack like wildfire. Ilara, the quiet apprentice, was now Luna, the Alpha Queen. The pack members who had once ignored or scorned her now bowed their heads in reverence and awe. Maeve, the head healer, was speechless with shock, her cruelty replaced by a fumbling, fearful respect. Ilara found it all disorienting. She was moved from her tiny, cold room to the sprawling royal chambers. She was given gowns of velvet and silk instead of rough-spun wool. But the opulence meant little to her. What mattered was Kalen. He was nothing like the myth. The cold, merciless king the world saw was a mask he wore to protect a kingdom and a deep, ancient wound. With her, he was different. He was gentle, attentive, almost worshipful. He spent hours just watching her, as if he couldn't believe she was real. He taught her about her power. The fire was a part of her, an extension of her soul. It was wild and untrained, but it responded to her emotions. When she was happy, she radiated a gentle warmth that made the flowers in the castle gardens bloom out of season. When she was angry, a rare occurrence, the air around her would crackle with heat. "Our powers are two sides of the same coin," he explained one evening as they sat before the hearth in their chambers. He held her hand, his fingers laced through hers. His skin was always warm now when he was with her. Her fire kept his curse at bay, a constant, simmering warmth that soothed the icy core of his magic. "My frost is control, stasis, an ending," he said, his golden eyes watching the flames. "Your fire is life, change, a beginning. Without you, I would have eventually frozen myself into a statue of ice. I could stop my enemies, but I couldn't stop the cold inside me." "And without you?" she asked softly. "What would have happened to me?" "Your fire would have remained a secret, even to you," he said, his grip tightening on her hand. "A life half-lived. You saved me from a frozen death, Ilara. And I hope, have saved you from a cold life." It was mutual rescue. She understood that now. He had given her a home, a name, a purpose. He had shown her that she was not worthless, but essential. And she, in turn, had given him warmth. She had thawed his soul. Lord Valerius was brought before them in the great hall for his judgment. The entire pack was assembled. The former advisor was a shadow of his former self, gaunt and broken from his time in the dungeons. He confessed everything. He had been subtly poisoning the king for years with a rare herb that agitated the frost curse, hoping to accelerate its progress. He had manipulated council members, spread rumors of the king's instability, and positioned himself to take control. He admitted to orchestrating the circumstances that would leave Kalen at his most vulnerable after the battle. Kalen sat on the Alpha throne, a figure of immense power and authority. Ilara sat beside him, on a throne carved to match his. She wore a gown the color of embers, and her presence seemed to fill the hall with a gentle warmth. When the confession was done, Kalen looked at her. He did not need to speak the words. Through the bond, she felt his question. "What is your judgment, my fire?" This was her pack now, too. Her home? This man had threatened not just her king, but her mate. She looked at Valerius, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her new role. She was not just a healer. She was a queen. She rose to her feet, her voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent hall. His crime was not just treason against a king, she said, her eyes finding Valerius's. It was a crime against the pack. He sought to plunge our home into darkness and chaos for his own ambition. He preyed on sickness and called it strength. She looked at Kaelin, and a silent understanding passed between them. He will be exiled, stripped of his name and his rank. He will be sent to the barren lands, to live out his days with nothing but the treachery that has kept him company for so long. It was a fate worse than death for a wolf, to be without a pack, without a name. It was just. It was merciful, in its own harsh way. Kaelin nodded once, his expression proud. So it is decreed, he boomed, by your queen. As Valerius was dragged away, a new era began for the Blackwood Pack. An era not of cold rule, but of balanced power. An age of fire and ice. Months melted into a year. The northern lands flourished under their joint rule. Kaelin's strength, tempered by Alara's warmth and compassion, made him a better king than he had ever been. Alara, once the invisible girl scrubbing floors, became a beloved Luna, known for her kindness, her wisdom, and the gentle heat that always seemed to surround her. She never lost the part of her that was a healer. She spent much of her time in the den, working alongside a humbled Maeve, her fiery touch now able to mend wounds and soothe fevers in ways magic alone never could. She healed not just with her power, but with her empathy. One crisp winter morning, Alara stood with Kaelin on the high balcony of the fortress, looking out over the snow-covered kingdom. A thick fur cloak was wrapped around them both, and she leaned back against his solid, warm chest. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The silence? The solitude?" He rested his chin on the top of her head, his arms wrapped securely around her. "Prison of ice. I didn't know the prison of ice. I didn't know the difference until you." He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes serious. "I love you, Alara. I'm saying that I love you, and it's going to kill me." The old joke, a relic of his past fears, was now just a whisper of a memory. Love hadn't killed him. It had saved him. "I know," she said, smiling as she reached up to touch his face. His skin was warm. He was always warm. "It saved me, too." The cold was no longer her companion. It was just a season, a memory. Her world was no longer a place of perpetual winter. It was a place of balance, of love, of belonging. Here, in the arms of the Alpha King, her Alpha King, she was finally, truly home. And their kingdom, once ruled by a lonely, frozen heart, was now warmed by the fire of his queen.